Since I can remember being a kid, I always wanted to draw and paint. It was always just something that I liked doing. I fidgeted a lot when I was a kid, and just a natural thing to do was to draw and paint. When I started at college, I was starting to meet some of the other street artists and things that are around Sydney. That all came together at the same time to develop into this practice. The graphic nature really came about through meeting street artists in Sydney, and what I loved about what they did was that it was so immediate and it had an impact. It was very bold, the colours were bright, and it was done quite quickly. They didn't seem to be too precious about the surface of the wall that they were painting on. They didn't seem to care too much about the canvas they were painting on. It was about getting a message across quickly and graphically. And my training up until then had been quite traditional and a bit formal, and I felt that what I was doing was a bit boring as a result. And when I looked at these guys and had exposure to what they were doing and the pace with which they were making these works, really stuck with me, and I tried to do that myself. So I started with some small stencils, and that just developed over time. But it was certainly through meeting those graffiti artists, street artists from Sydney that encouraged me to do something a bit more edgy as well. Well, it was actually a painting that got me into architecture. So many people ask me if I've studied architecture, and I haven't, but I did sculpture as my undergrad, and so that had a little bit to do with it. But the interest in architecture came through a painting my parents owned, and it's a painting by Geoffrey Smart, who's a well-known Australian artist. And like many of his works, it was based on the urban setting within Australia. And that then, I used to make copies of it and do little scribbles of it when I was at school. And that sort of developed into just an appreciation for the urban scape rather than the Australian bush scene, which we're very much familiar with. And to me, it said a lot more about Australian identity, so I started looking at that even more so. The painting part itself is usually between 1 to 2 weeks, and that doesn't sound like very long, but that's the finishing piece of the process. The paintings always begin with a photograph that I take in different locations, and that photograph, when I'm happy with it, I'll stick it up on the studio wall, and it might sit there for a year or two until I think I can use that for this series of work. And that's how I usually work, by taking a house, for example, from one location, a forest from another, and then I collage them on the picture plane to make new sort of utopias. So sourcing the image, that takes a long time, and it's quite arbitrary. You don't know when it's going to occur to be something of use. I think if I stuck to just painting, I'd get bored and a bit restless. And the thing that I've found most inspiring recently is going back to sculpture. I'm studying a master's at College of Fine Arts, again now in Sydney, and part of that is to investigate the stencil. And I've been looking at exhibiting the stencils on their own, as well as translating them into bronze sculptures, which are part of this exhibition. But the idea with the photograph, the stencil, the painting and the sculpture is translating a three-dimensional space, like the empty swimming pool or a forest scene or whatever it might be, into a two-dimensional plane. And so I'm hoping that with those mediums they can sort of cross-pollinate. I hope that people feel that they're invited into the space, but then have a sort of contrast with feeling like they shouldn't be there at the same time. I always leave the paintings devoid of human form so that the viewer is encouraged to generate their own response to the space. And what I'm trying to get across in the works is what it was like to actually be in that space and photograph it and take the time to observe it.